Did you just go to make your favorite recipe but find out that you're out of the ingredients you need? Don't worry, I have you covered. Stay tuned because I'm sharing with you my top ingredient swaps for those baking emergencies. Hey, thanks so much for joining me here today. I'm Erin from Healthy Mom, Happy Family, and today I'm talking to you about finding those baking swaps when you have those grocery emergencies. If you're going to cook your favorite recipe and you found out you don't have any eggs, and you go to the grocery store and there's none there either, what do? I'm showing you 7 easy swaps with ingredients you already have in your house. So first, let's talk about butter. All right, butter is a main ingredient in a lot of baked goods. Whether you're gonna make cookies or muffins, you need butter. But if you find that you're out, there's other ingredients you can swap in a 1-to-1 ratio. And those are as easy as using avocado or pureed white beans. All you do is puree or mash the avocado or the white beans and use the same amount as you would have in butter in your baked goods. And the recipe comes out delicious, plus it's actually more nutritious. You get more fiber, you get fewer grams of saturated fat, and in the case of the avocado, you get more of those heart-healthy monounsaturated fats too. Now let's talk a little bit about sugar. Whenever you're making a baked good, chances are the recipe calls for sugar. But if you're out, what do? Well, if you don't have sugar, but you have any kind of dried fruit, you can puree it and exchange it in the recipe in replacement of the sugar. So here I have, these are dried prunes. All you would do is puree them up and use the same amount as you would have in sugar in the recipe. The great thing about using prunes too is not only are they sweet and delicious, but they hold in a lot of moisture. So they really give a nice texture to those baked goods as well. And just like with the butter swap, it's healthier. We don't want too much added sugar in our diet. So when you swap it with prunes, you increase the amount of fiber, you increase the amount of nutrition, and you don't have all of that added sugar that can cause our blood sugar and insulin levels to skyrocket. Now, what about eggs? It seems like eggs are a staple ingredient into pretty much anything you make. And if you run out of eggs, or right now, sometimes eggs are just a little bit hard to find, you might feel like you're completely stuck. But there's a really easy trick that you can use to replicate eggs in any sort of baked goods. And this involves just using chia seeds. All you do is take a tablespoon of chia seeds and add 2.5 tablespoons of water. Now you have to let it sit for about 5 minutes. But once it solidifies and it gets that gelatin consistency, you can put that substitute into the recipe in replacement of the egg, and it'll still give you that same texture that your egg would have given you in the normal recipe. Now, one that you might wonder, what the heck do you do if you're out of, is baking soda. Baking soda is a really important ingredient when we're talking about baked goods and making sure that they rise. But if you're out of it, you're out of it. If you have baking powder on hand, you can utilize it by replacing it with 4 times as much as what the recipe called for in baking soda. So if the recipe said you needed a teaspoon of baking soda, you would replace it with 4 teaspoons of baking powder. And that swap will get you that same consistency that you're looking for with the recipe. Let's talk about breadcrumbs. So breadcrumbs are really important if you're making anything from a meatloaf to a casserole. But sometimes you're out of them. So there's a lot of things you can do to substitute for breadcrumbs, and I bet you have some of them in the house. You can use rolled oats, and you can either use them how they are, or you can put them in the food processor or even a blender to make them a little bit finer. Or if you don't have that around, any sort of cracker works. Any type of cracker. Your kids have Cheez-Its, Goldfish, whatever you have. You can take it, smash it, crunch it up, and you can use that as a replacement for breadcrumbs. Or if you have a loaf of bread around, you can leave the bread out overnight, let it get stale, and then you can crunch that up as a breadcrumb replacement as well. Now, what about oil? So say you're making brownies or you're making any kind of baked good and you find out you're out of oil. You can't go to the store, you can't get any more. Well, if you have a banana on hand, you're in luck. Because if you use the same amount of mashed banana as the recipe called for in oil, you have a great replacement that cuts down on the amount of calories and fat in the recipe anyway. So if the recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of oil, use a 1/2 cup of mashed banana instead, and you have an ideal replacement. And finally, one thing I found lately that's been a little bit challenging to find is flour. So baked goods especially, they usually call for flour. Now what I want you to know is any type of flour is fine. So if a recipe called for all-purpose flour and you want to exchange it with whole wheat flour or oat flour, that's fine. Nut flours like almond flour or coconut flour, those can be great substitutes as well. But typically they require and they hold on to a little bit more moisture, so you might have to change some of the wet ingredients in the recipe. But there's a few tricks that you can use too. If you're totally out of flour, you can't find it anywhere, you have a couple options. You can take the rolled oats, grind them up in a food processor until you can get them as fine as possible, and make your own oat flour. Or you can even use something like pancake mix. That could be a substitute too. Now the one thing I want you to remember with pancake mix is many times it already includes those leavening agents like baking powder or baking soda. So you might need to adjust that slightly in the recipe. But otherwise, if you have it on hand, it can be a substitute too. So there you go. There's 7 easy baking swaps that you can use no matter what grocery emergency that you come across. So let me know in the comments below and tell me, did these swaps help you? Which ones are you going to use the most? And if you like today's information, don't forget to hit subscribe below so that you never miss new tips, tricks, and videos. Thanks for joining me.